Alexandra's story about that transformation from I'm here to help you, the other, to, oh, we're learning here together, we're empowering each other. And now that I know your story and you know mine, we're all teaching each other, reminded me of a saying that I've heard many times over the years, but I'm only just now really starting to understand it. And it's something that Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal Australian elder, said that got picked up and is sort of a rallying cry of all social justice movements. And here's what she said. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I want to thank Alexandra for everything she said, because to me that was all just a woo, and very, very powerful. I want to tell you all something that last weekend from this pulpit, I shared with you that I had attended an ECHO meeting of the Beloved Community Initiative at St. Stephen's in Lynn. And Alexandra was there that night too. I told you last weekend how we in ECHO talked about how to be a bridge between the police force and the community. And I told you about the deaths of two men of color in Lynn, Sam Dunn and Randolph McLean, and how they were connected to people in ECHO and St. Stephen's. While I was telling you this from the pulpit here, or from right here, I heard myself say that those two men had been murdered. And at the very moment I heard myself use that word, I flinched. Murder is a very loaded, moral, and legal term. It is not a word that would have slipped out of my mouth even a few years ago in relation to the shooting death of a man who was a criminal in the midst of a shootout with police officers, or one that would have slipped out of my mouth to describe the death of a man who was in police custody and being transported by the sheriff. I never would have used that word. And just a few years ago, reading those stories in the news, I would not have likely thought to stop and look at or notice either of the men's names, or to wonder who knew them, or whose son they were, or whose father they might have been, or whose friend they might have been. I would have thought, it's just another story, criminals, that's the police doing their job. It must be a terrible thing to shoot somebody and have to kill them while you're doing your job. If they weren't criminals, this wouldn't have happened. And so last week with you, when that word murdered came out accidentally, I don't know if any of you caught it or questioned it, or if it felt like an acceptable usage to you. I only want you to know that it shocked me to say it. And that when I did, I knew, and I filed away for further reflection and prayer this week, that I use that word because I've been changed by the work that we are doing. I have begun to see the complexity in situations I previously did not question. I have begun to wonder whose side of the story I have not had access to, especially if they are dead. I have begun to realize at a deeper level that our liberation is truly bound up with each other, all of us. And the reason that I have changed is because I've spent the past couple of years focused on hearing stories and sitting with people whose stories I have not ever heard before in the virtual space of the internet, and listening, and in real life, and listening. Categories of criminal and victim and protector are now less defined in my mind. Stories are liberating, but caution, they may change easier and clearer moral positions in our minds and introduce major questions about ourselves. And that is challenging. I'm so glad we heard "Stand By Me" just now. It's a perfect song for where we are, who we are trying to be. Every time we are able to stand by anyone and hear their story, we have a chance to be mutually liberated from our preconceptions of one another that separate us. And that's probably going to cost every one of us something in the way of ego. For everyone involved. We drop a lot of ego on the way to solidarity. And that's the humbling process to which I believe religious life and radical hospitality call us. That's what we're after. So eventually we stop saying things like, I'm going to help the less fortunate, or I'm going to help the homeless. To, we start thinking about it more like, I'm going to share some time with other people around a meal, because everyone needs to eat. My role will be to serve the meal, they'll be eating, but we're all just people being together. In the first weeks of February, we reflected together on our commitment to hospitality within this church. And so I invited Alexandra to speak with us today because I wanted to move from within the church to beyond the church, into our ministries beyond these walls, and where we also take our ethos of hospitality and radical welcome. We live in a time of tremendous upheaval where global unrest is bringing us to extra keen and often painful awareness of our interconnectedness. As warriors for the human spirit, we're going to have to be the ones who are willing to take the time to push ourselves to think beyond categories like immigrant, refugees, the needy, the oppressed, the homeless, the convict. This is all just a way to say the other. And we must be those who are not just willing, but actually excited. Actually excited and happy to be able to pull up a chair, listen to a story, and be changed by what we learn. So that each one who was formerly an other becomes a neighbor, whom we are required by every wisdom tradition in the world to love as ourselves.